Okay, so I get a lot of questions about how I draft my patterns for my clients because I know in a lot of my videos I show you guys me using the dress form, but today I'm working on an actual client wedding dress, so I decided to go ahead and just turn on the camera and film it. So my starting place is with my corset pattern. I did a whole video on this and how I like to grade it up and down. I have it in lots of sizes. So I started with my size 16 because that's what my client's measurements were closest to. And then I started to grade it up. I didn't show that in this video just because I literally filmed a whole video on how I do this. I'll link it above for you guys to go ahead and check out. But now what I'm doing is I added a 3/4 inch seam allowance. The reason why I'm using 3/4 of an inch is because my machine has like 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, 3/4 of an inch, and then 1.25 inches. So I decided to go ahead and do 3/4 of an inch so that there's room for me to adjust it up if I need to. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut all of my pattern pieces out. And I didn't add any seam allowance at the top or at the bottom, just because I'm gonna make a mock-up of it and I want to make sure that it's sitting in the places exactly where I want it to sit on my client before I go ahead and add the seam allowance there, because when you add the seam allowance, it's just kind of distracting. So yeah, I'm gonna add the seam allowance to all the rest of the pieces and then grade up the back pieces the same way I did in that video. And then I will go ahead and cut a mock-up. Okay, so today's video is gonna be a little bit different. I'm gonna do a lot less talking about what I'm doing and more of just showing you the whole vibe of how I make dresses for my clients. Today is going to be the corset portion of the dress. I have made a mock-up here and I'm always measuring my mock-up. Notice I have lines that extend across my bust line, my under bust line, my waistline, and my hip line. As I am constructing this dress, you will see me constantly measuring it to make sure that I'm constructing it in the right size, because there's always boo-boos, whether you're sewing at the wrong seam allowance or there's human error when you're cutting out the pattern pieces. So you always want to keep measuring. And then I put my adjustments there on the side so I know what I need to do. Now that I've made my adjustments, now I'm going to go ahead and put it on my dress form to just kind of see what it's looking like, because keep in mind that this is not the same size as my dress form, but I like to see things on a 3D form, especially when I'm making the neckline. So I'm going to go ahead and draw out my neckline here. And I am actually recreating a David's bridal dress. And let me know if you guys want to see a series on pattern drafting and creating a dress from an already made inspiration dress, whether it be David's bridal or high-end designer. I was thinking about doing that, and I think it would be a good idea. Let me know down in the comments if you guys want to see a series like that. But anyway, I am trimming all of the pieces, and now I'm measuring my apex to waist, and I'm comparing it to my client's measurement. And I noticed that I had to take it up about 1/2 an inch, or this is probably 3/4 of an inch. I can't remember, y'all. This is old footage. But I went ahead and drew that line up for my waistline, and I am gonna go ahead and fold that to make sure that's right. Now that my pattern is adjusted, now I'm gonna go ahead and use some corset mesh to cut out the inner structure of the dress, of the corset part of the bodice, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and cut that out, and I'm gonna sew this with French seams. So what I'm doing is measuring my boning, and I'm adding that to my seam allowance, and I'm gonna go ahead and draw that all the way around. I like to draw on my fabric now versus cutting around my pattern pieces, because I find that this is more accurate. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm trying to do this quickly. I find out that this is more accurate. And I also, you find errors more when you're doing more handwork. So it helps save a lot of time from errors that you may find after you've already sewn things together. So now I'm going to go ahead and create a casing for my corset mesh to go ahead and do the boning layer on the corset. So I used corset mesh, and I just pressed it to create a tube similar to the way you would do like a spaghetti strap or something like that. That's what I did. And I am also ironing the center front of my corset mesh just to make sure that I'm placing my boning casing right at the center front. And I'm going to go ahead and pin these on here real quick. And then I decided I don't know why I pinned the other one on. I'm going to top stitch these casings on. Now, if this were like, if you were doing this onto the lining layer where you would see it, then you will want to make sure that your casing is nice and clean. Your stitch lines are like 4mm because it's top stitching. And I'm also putting my boning in here to make sure that my boning can actually fit in the casing. The way I sew, I try to make sure that all the mistakes that can arise are dealt with as I'm doing it, rather than having everything done and then trying to put my boning in there and then it doesn't fit. I'm constantly checking my work to make sure the measurements are right and that everything fits. Here I go, checking it again, folding it in half, making sure that my pattern pieces are symmetrical from my structure layer to my outer layer, which is going to be a satin. And then I'm going to press that fold away that I just created. Now I'm going to assemble all of my pieces. I like to batch assemble. You guys know how I do. I am matching all of my pieces and pin, please, guys. This is what it looks like when it's all done. I sew this with French seams. Now I'm starting to batch process my lining layer and my outer layer. I'm going to go ahead and match my princess seams up. And guys, please don't copy me what I'm doing right here. Make sure that you're pinning, because pinning is going to, once again, stop a lot of mistakes that can occur if you don't pin. So please do pin. I was kind of in a rush when I was doing this, so I decided not to pin, but usually I do pin all of my seams down at the table before I go ahead and bring it to my sewing machine. And I am going to make sure that everything is nice and clean, making sure to snip all of my extra threads off. I don't want any threads hanging, and it's a mess when you come back later on and do your threads. Now I'm placing my hanging loops on the princess seam of my lining layer, and I'm sewing that down, and then I'm going to measure down with using my measuring tape to make sure my hanging loops are symmetrical on the other side, and I'm going to sew that down as well, and then finish sewing down my princess seams and my supporting princess seam. Now I'm over at my serger, and for my face layer, I'm going to serge my seam open. So that means, I'm just serging each side of the seam allowance separately, and I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of the seams on my face layer. Now I'm on to my lining layer, and for my lining, I'm going to serge my seams together, and I'm going to press them over to one side. I do this because I've been doing a lot of alterations lately, and I've been kind of trying to mimic what these high-end designers are doing, and this is what they do. So this is what the finished product looks like. It's super clean, all 3 layers. Keep in mind that my side seam has not been sewed yet. I just assembled the front and the back separately, and now we can go ahead and put it all together. So I put everything together, and I'm sewing my side seams here. And once again, I'm not pinning, y'all. Please do not do what I'm doing, and make sure that you're pinning everything to make sure everything lines up where it's supposed to, and you're not getting any puckering in your seams. So I'm going to go ahead and sew, like I said, my side seams for my structure layer, my lining layer, and my face layer. And for the structure layer, by the way, I am making sure to sew those side seams open and not as French seams, just in case we need to make any adjustments to the final fit of the corset portion of the dress. Now I am sewing the straps on to the face portion, and I didn't get any footage of making these straps because they were really a pain in my butt. But this is what it looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and start stacking my layers now. Now, don't do what I'm doing here because this was wrong. This structure layer is actually supposed to go on the wrong side of the bodice, not the right side. So I noticed that after I had done all this sewing, and I had to rip it up. So make sure that you're putting your structure layer on the wrong side of your bodice. But I'm going to go ahead and let's just pretend like our structure layer is at the bottom, and we're going to baste this within our seam allowance at the top, just so when we sew our lining layer, there's no puckering or moving from this. And now I put my lining layer right sides together with the with the face layer, and I'm going to go ahead and sew another row of stitching here, and I'm making sure to keep this nice and clean. Notice that I did actually pin all of this. And at this point, I did have a fitting with my bride, and unfortunately my bride gained about 2 inches across her waist and her bust line, so I had to completely remake the whole bodice, which is fine because I learned from my mistakes from the first bodice, and I created a bodice that was so much better than the first. If you guys want to see a tutorial on how I drafted this, I did record it, so I can go ahead and show you guys, but this is what the bodice looks like, so much better than the first. We decided not to go ahead and extend down with the corset on the inside, and this is what it looks like with the skirt on here. I absolutely love this, and I also put pockets in it, but I'm so sorry I didn't like really record this because I was like fast trying to get it done because I had to completely remake the dress. But that happens. It happens more often than not lately, to be honest. Yeah, so let me know what you guys think. If you want a full tutorial, let me know, and I'll see you guys in my next one.